Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This, of course, is the Wrestling Ramblings and Rages podcast. I'm your host, Mr. James Shimo, and I am joined, of course, by my co-host, Mr. Ryan Payne. Ryan, how are you doing, my friend? It has been a crazy, crazy couple of weeks. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing very well, actually, and I do agree. So it's been a long, long time since we've gotten together. And but you know what? Either way, wrestling content still keeps going. So why should we try to recap ourselves and just put our best foot forward?
Right. Well, I mean, I do believe though that our fans do deserve a bit of an explanation. And let's be fair. Life tends to happen. Right. This show, as you guys know, has been a passion project of mine. Along with Ryan, we brought in our buddy Brenton McPherson not too long ago, who's been a great friend of the show. He's been a great contributor. Love having him on. But as tends to happen, life kind of ends up just throwing these little monkey wrenches in every once in a while. That's not to say that those monkey wrenches are always bad. For me, I was wrapping up a year of school where I was working as a teacher, and I was moving in with my girlfriend and my kids. As you can see, I have a brand new location set up now. We've decided to transition into doing video as well as audio podcasts, which every podcast that we do will be live first right here on the Shimanator Productions YouTube channel, youtube.com/Shimanator Productions. You can also find us on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all of that good stuff as well. Just search the Wrestling Ramblings and Rages podcast. Cheap plug out of the way in that case. But as I was saying, moving in with, my new family and this and that, getting my new space set up, it took a little bit of time. So I do apologize for the hiatus, but in the long run, I do think the hiatus served us all fairly well. You've got your own irons and a lot of fires and things like that, and projects that you're working on. Brenton, of course, has his own things going on as well. So I think the hiatus gave us some time to actually kind of reconnect, refocus, and just get our creative juices flowing again. Not unlike the subject of today's video, or today's podcast, should I say, but we will get to that momentarily. But yes, from now on, we will be doing semi-regular shows here. I'd like to say we'll try to do bi-weekly here. Every 2 weeks, we will put up a new episode that you can be familiar with. They may not all be related to professional wrestling. They are at least not reviewing the shows and things like that, because let's face it, there's not a lot on WWE TV that is worthy of reviewing these days. Aside from SmackDown,
they're sure as shit.
Yeah, and especially with the overhauls that are being made to NXT right now, and everything else that you just keep hearing about in the news. It's a bleak time if you are a fan of quote unquote sports entertainment. I personally will stick with my love of professional wrestling, and that of course bleeds into AEW, whether it's Dark Elevation, Dynamite, Rampage, any of their pay-per-views, Impact, New Japan, all of that sort of things. Those where I'm going to
NWA and Ring of Honor, they're doing some good stuff, especially what they've been doing on the female front. Ring of Honor, they've been doing their women's tournaments. I've watched a couple of matches, and I know NWA, Mickie James herself, she's getting more involved with like the promotion business side of it, especially what she's doing on Impact as well. So definitely
that also makes sense, especially her involvement with the NWA. After all, her husband is, of course, Nick Aldis, the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, so makes sense. We got the Ryan Cross Project in the chat saying, glad to have you guys back. Hope to join you guys sometime. We would love to have you on, Ryan. We really would. Travis. That's our buddy Travis. Travis is a good friend of ours. Yeah, he also writes in, the new NXT logo looks like it failed fad in the 80s, I guess, or failed federation in the 80s, I guess. Yeah, you're absolutely not wrong there, Travis. There's a lot of changes coming in the old big WWE area that it's cringeworthy to talk about. Again, just more and more, it shows that Vince McMahon has regressed in his, decision making all the way back to the 80s, as if he wasn't far enough back that way already. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Ladies and gentlemen, it finally happened. The day that so many of us thought was nothing but a pipe dream has arrived. The one, the only, the Second City Savior, the best in the world, CM Punk, has made his return to pro wrestling. He is all elite, and he has one hell of a match set up for this coming Sunday. We are taping this on August 28th or 29th, I should say. Excuse me. So this Sunday, September 5th, AEW All Out. It will be CM Punk, the best in the world, versus Darby Allin. If the pay-per-view buy rates for that show were not already through the roof, they sure as hell are now. We've got a ton that we need to get through to unpack with this because I took the liberty of watching his promo on Rampage. I watched all of that. I watched the post-show media scrum that they did after the show. I watched his promo on Dynamite this past Wednesday. Everything he is doing right now is firing on all cylinders. It has a ton of buzz behind it. And again, I don't blame USA Network and Fox for getting pissed at Vince McMahon for not bringing CM Punk back, for not being able to sign him, for burning that bridge with him so hard that he decided to go to the competition. But we'll get to that here in a few moments. First of all, Ryan, before we get into the deep dive on all these little minutia going on here, your just initial overall thoughts on the return to pro wrestling after 7.5 years, heck, almost 7 years and 7 months of CM Punk.
Okay, I don't want to get too much into this, but I was 100% worried at first when Darby teased that little line on Dynamite.
We all were.
Rampage, the first Rampage, because it was really difficult to determine exactly if this was going to pan out itself. And even then, the Bucks and Kenny, they were doing a good job. Tony Khan has proved 100% that he's willing to work with people. Especially through the Forbidden Door. I mean, first off, working with Don Callis and through Impact, and then reaching out to New Japan to have some talents there. I mean, right now, of course, because they're all on AEW. I can understand some of the naysayers saying that AEW is mainly benefiting from this, and you have your valid points. But at the same time, if you were in charge or 100% responsible for opening the doorway for many wrestling companies to work together and share talent to come across the doors, I can understand if you bring a talent from, let's say, Ring of Honor or Impact onto your promotion, you'd kind of book them to make sure your talent goes over. But what I've seen with AEW and what they've done even with the talent they have through Dark and Dark Elevation, they book them to make them look good, and even if they do have a humiliating loss, they book them so they have the continuing story, which is why at first I was worried about it, but I do love the whole wins and losses record now because it is there to be a constant reminder for wrestlers to want to climb that ladder, get better, and sometimes some of the losses on their record could be something very important. Like, let's say for Darby Allin, sure, he's not an undefeated guy, but some of his big losses this past year his biggest loss was against Miro, for Christ's sake. And Miro, who's now the TNT champion, is moving that forward. But reverting back to my thoughts on CM Punk. CM Punk, yeah, his speech on Rampage, it was perfect. I mean, I can understand some people are going, oh, he could have easily ripped into the WWE and buried them like crazy. But no, he just laid out all of his emotions out on the line. He took responsibility and accountability for the fact that it wasn't just the company that made his attitude sour. Sure, they were the source of the problem, but he was the one carrying all of this negativity and toxic emotions that he's even said he's probably burned a couple of bridges in the back as well. And I look forward to seeing him try to amend or rebuild those bridges. Because, of course, one wrestler in particular we know who's a part of AEW who's famously known, who we well know had the biggest fall with CM Punk is Colt Cabana. So, yep. While right now that's going to be put on ice until the time happens, I am enjoying what they're doing with Punk right now. They're just bringing him out, getting the crowd to relish the fact that he is here, talking with him. I can't remember much of the media scrum. I know you'll get into it more. But
I took notes.
From what I saw with Rampage and Dynamite, Punk is 100% happy to be back. And you can tell this is Punk just letting his emotions. He's wearing his heart on his sleeve at this point.
Absolutely. And we'll go ahead and we'll start breaking into this. But yeah, no, absolutely. Anybody who isn't already aware, obviously there was a massive lawsuit that came down on both CM Punk and Colt Cabana when they did the whole Art of Wrestling podcast a while back. That was, God, what was that, 2015? So almost like 6 years ago.
Yeah,
Really
a year and a half, maybe a year and a half off of him being released.
Yeah, so like 2015, 2016-ish. But the point is they got in hot water with WWE Dr. Chris Amon. They went through this whole lawsuit together. Apparently there was a miscommunication between the two over who was covering what in terms of legal bills and things like that, which led to a lawsuit between the two, which got settled. Obviously, again, there may still be pre-existing bad blood, but I'll get into kind of what was going on in the media scrum because I believe Punk addressed that in there somewhere. But let's go ahead and start this off. So we start things off on AEW Rampage, the second episode ever, live in Chicago. And right away, they just get it out of the way because they knew that if they didn't do this now, they'd be hearing CM Punk chants throughout the entire night. Not a damn match would go by where it wasn't just being rained on by CM Punk chants. It would have made everybody else feel like a bunch of jackasses. Because they'd be like, nobody's here for us. They're all here for this. Let's just give it to them first. So that way, everybody can enjoy the matches. Nobody else has to feel like their thunder's being stolen.
I mean, the best example I can see is WWE, obviously. WrestleMania after WrestleMania 28. There was when the news was released that Brock Lesnar was coming back. There were sparingly some Brock Lesnar chants throughout the entire Raw afterwards. Despite there were some good returns, some good show-ups, but everybody's main focus was Brock Lesnar. And even when Cena went out there to do his little promo about The Rock, what do we hear? Brock Lesnar, Brock Lesnar. And WWE is terrible at booking or at least trying to hide returns, honestly. They're terrible at this. The only one who's ever successfully been good at that is Jericho and The Rock. And they do it when people are least expecting it.
Yeah, I mean, even though it was hinted at, I'd say the Edge return at the 2020 Royal Rumble was handled well.
Yeah, that one was.
But again, it's very few and far between. But in any case, again, Cult of Personality hits. Which, come on, if you didn't think Tony Khan was going to fork over the money for the rights to that, you're a freaking idiot.
He is not a cheapskate like Vince. Okay,
no. Tony Khan's got money to burn, and he is all about keeping his talent happy, which is, again, something that CM Punk touches on later. But, again, Cult of Personality hits. You know, everybody's like, okay, is this really happening, or is MJF just fucking with us? You know, this, that, or the other.
That crowd was incredible.
Oh, the crowd was electric from Jump Street. But as soon as he comes through that tunnel and the camera gets a close-up on him, that whole arena exploded. Everybody, like, there were people crying in the audience, which, again, I know some people say, you know, yeah, the guy's like, it's wrestling, it's this, that, and the other. But when you dedicate yourself to something like that, there were people crying when Edge returned from his injury because that was a major thing. He was told, if you try to keep doing this, you will end up in a wheelchair. There is no ways about it.
When Daniel Bryan and Paige both had to return for neck problems, there are people in the crowd crying too. And I follow Paige on Twitch. When she was with her fans, she even replayed some of her old wrestling videos for her Twitch followers. One of them was the one she retired. And there were people in the Twitch chat, which I was in as well, talking about how much it hurt them, and it got her to tear up as well.
So I saw that.
Yeah. And at the same time, not just wrestling, but if you're a sports fan and a sports player you love either retires or he comes back for one more go, aren't you gonna lose your shit crying or you know, with being overflown with emotion? I mean, so it's very stupid in my opinion. It's very stupid to direct this kind of negativity towards wrestling fans who were there at the Union Center shedding a tear for CM Punk returning. You need to look at exactly what sport you follow and how passionate you are about that sport. If you're going to criticize wrestling, you shouldn't judge that. I'm not going to judge someone who's a fan of football in Europe, and they are very passionate fans in Europe.
Oh, yes.
So I'm not going to judge them on who on the sport they follow. Same here in this country. I won't judge anyone who follows the NFL or the NBA or MLB. I'm not judging you guys, so don't try to throw that judgment back on me.
Exactly. And there's not a damn person out there who can't tell me that they never got emotionally invested in a TV show or a movie or anything like that to where it tugged on their heartstrings and they got a little misty-eyed. Because if somebody is out there who will tell me that, I will show you a freaking liar. But in any case, let's see. We got another comment here from Travis. It says, AEW is the only wrestling I watch now. I may just dump Peacock on principle. Actually, give me 5 minutes. Okay.
You don't have to dump it for just WWE. I mean, there's some good television shows on Peacock, but if that's
your thing, I was watching. I've been binging 2.5 Men all day. I love Peacock. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a ton of good stuff there.
No, they got both the Bad Boys movies on Psych. I'm definitely on Peacock, so I'm definitely watching those movies.
Oh yeah, they got the John Wick films, the Wizarding World films. They got the Fast and the Furious films, or at least a handful of them. So there's a lot of content to really appreciate about Peacock. Don't just do it based on WWE, and there's a lot of value for that dollar. So hey, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But in any case.
But I can understand if you just sign up for simply WWE and you're not interested anymore. That's some of my opinion with some Netflix properties. Like, is there some shows on Netflix that's worth me watching this, even though I can find most of these movies cycling on any other program? You know.
Yeah. But in any case, as we were saying, so obviously Punk comes out, and as soon as he hits his knees on the ramp, you can see the emotion all over his face. And what that face and what that expression said to me was, I know I missed this. I just really didn't know how much until this moment.
Exactly.
And he even references that later on, and we'll get to that. But of course, he takes his time. He soaks it in. It's a Chicago crowd. It's his hometown. He's basking in the moment. You know, it's not like Keith Lee basking in his own glory, but he is basking in the glory of what this now means to him, with his creative juices flowing again, with his fire reignited, you know, and all of this kind of stuff. So he makes his way down to the ring. They run out of music. They don't re-cue it up. They just kind of let him go slap hands with fans and this and that. 90 seconds later, out of an ad break, we come back. Punk's just standing in the ring, and I love the first line out of his mouth. Boy, you guys really know how to make a guy feel like Britt Baker in Pittsburgh. Because I'm like, that was great. First line out of his mouth, he's putting over a younger talent who is a major star in her own right, and making sure she gets a rub off of his name. Love that.
Mega fucking star, honestly.
Hell yes.
But it goes to show. And one thing I did enjoy about Punk, him coming down the ring, when he got to that base part of the base of the ramp, he's just hugging fans in there. And then there was fans. He looks across. Some of the fans are like, Shannon, come on, hug us. But he just runs and dives on those
crowd dives, which the security guy friggin' hated.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
I was so upset about that.
Just me watching that scene, the security guard, he's like, what? No, get back in here.
It's hilarious. And some of the signs that were in there, like, if Punk is here, we riot. Like, that's great. Yeah. I thought that was hilarious. The one that got me, somebody's holding up a sign that says 2,766 days. That's how long it's been since we've seen CM Punk on a national wrestling promotion. And more importantly, that shows you the dedication of the following that a lot of these guys have for CM Punk. He was the one who, he called himself a long time ago, the voice of the voiceless. The ones like us who were chanting for WWE. Make a change. Do something different. Give us a reason to care. Exactly. And they just didn't do it. And now finally, that beacon of hope, that person that we identified with, the one who reignited our passion for this business, was finally back.
Yeah.
And I tell you, it was great.
That was beautiful. And one thing I will say, I'm going to be objective at first. I can understand there are some wrestling fans out there who don't see the appeal of Punk. And I understand it. He comes off maybe as an average guy to you guys. And maybe if you watch some of his matches, maybe he didn't get you going like watching guys like Batista or John Cena, Undertaker, Kane, or even some of the other talent like Ziggler, Rey Mysterio, or Ricochet. I can understand that maybe Punk was not for you guys, and maybe you just wouldn't understand the appeal. But even then, that time when he dropped that pipe bomb, let's not forget. I mean, that time around 2011. That was WWE during this time of the height of PG era, where it was nothing but short matches, consistent backstage skits, which they're still doing today, but it was more to where they were shoving down our throats. And this, at the time, this was John Cena, where everyone was hating him. The Cena, let's go Cena sucks chance. You were barely getting new stars to go for that championship. And as much as I like R-Truth, that time when they were pushing R-Truth as that heel character, that was the only legitimate time he was seen as a contender. After that, pushed down to the mid card and made it as a joke again. Now he works well, but it's just one of those examples because around that time there were so many young guys you could have brought up instead of constantly giving us Cena, Orton for the 5th time, or giving us or this was around the time with when they killed the Nexus. This was 6 months after they killed the Nexus too. So
yep.
You do see that around the time people were frustrated. Vince had an opportunity around 2010 to build a great new lineup of young stars that he could at least help circulate the mid card and the upper level to keep having every title fresh, but he wasn't doing that. And so when CM Punk made that pipe bomb, it wasn't more like a wake-up call. This was just finally him telling what everyone else was thinking, even though he was a bit of a heel and he was shooting at those fans, but it changed nothing. And then moving forward, seeing how Punk was able to at least be a different kind of champion that WWE produced was fantastic. And when he was let go, one of the biggest, honestly, as much as Vince wants to say, oh, I didn't expect that was going to happen, it's still one of the biggest middle fingers, the biggest fuck you to everybody out there.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Going from my personal standpoint, Punk being back and the fans being there it is proof that when you have wrestling fans that care, not just about wrestling alone, but about a wrestler that inspired them, and that a company like AEW was able to not only facilitate Punk's return, but to let him know that you can come back and work as many dates as you want, however you want. Because one thing everyone keeps forgetting about AEW, not all the wrestlers under their contract are obligated to be at Dynamite all the time. Some of them are there to wrestle dark matches, to be on AEW Dark or Dark Elevation. Some will be on Dynamite. And now with AEW Rampage, it's another platform for wrestlers who've been on Dark and Dark Elevation to get some TV time on Rampage, even though it's an hour show.
Yeah.
So, and the fact that Punk is going to be able, and the fact that Punk said in his speech, I got the time. I'm Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So knowing that Punk has the time, he's gonna be there. I don't know exactly how passionate he's gonna be. Is he gonna be like Thunder Rosa passionate to where Thunder Rosa, she's almost there every day, either working a match or like a couple weeks ago on Dark, she's been there on commentary. Yeah, that is something I'm looking forward to with Punk, seeing exactly how passionate he is and how much of his word he's gonna keep when it comes to this.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and keep moving forward here. So Punk starts off legitimately by saying, hey, this isn't scripted. I had no clue what I was going to come out here and say tonight because I didn't know how I was going to feel. But he said he needed to feel it. He needed to hear it. And, you know, he heard the CM Punk chants for 7+ years. He heard it. He recognized it. And he mentions, again, like you said, I've got the time, Wednesday, Friday, couple of Saturdays and Sundays a year. And he later confirmed that he is on a full-time contract with AEW in that post-show media scrum, which I thought was great. He, again, mentions why he left WWE. And I love this. And he brings it up and he addresses it right from the get-go because he knows there are some people out there who thought, oh, you know, you took your ball and went home. You're a quitter, or a quieter, as he called it in the Art of Wrestling podcast. But he says, if at all, through my journey, any of my personal choices or decisions related to my life made you feel disappointed or let down, let me just say, I understand. If you all try to understand that I was never going to get healthy physically, mentally, spiritually, or emotionally, staying in the same place that got me sick in the first place, which I thought was a great, great shot at WWE. It's just like, yeah, those guys are the ones who made me sick and tired of doing this. Not anymore. And I'm definitely not going back there because I'd be put right back in the same position, which I thought was great.
And I will say with Punk, he brings a great example of not just wrestlers in general, people who have certain jobs that they left in the past in a certain industry. And of course, they go back to it and they think things are going to be different and finding out, oh, nothing's changed as much. I've had jobs to where even though I've left on a seasonal basis, and then I come back and think, okay, maybe there's some things have changed. Maybe it's going to be more opportunity, more times to work. Like they're going to focus more on your hard work and experience than just more of coming in and thinking, oh, you have this sort of degree or you have this life experience, and we're going to push you up, you know. But it's a side person. It's only a personal sidebar, but ultimately in, you do see with Punk, not just with Punk example, but so many wrestlers that were fired or released from WWE and then come back later, and we're all expecting them to be given grand pushes to where they'll be big stars. Best example, EC3, when he was released during the early days of NXT, he makes a big name for himself on Impact. He comes back, all the NXT crowd was chanting his name. And unfortunately, his run in NXT did not work as well as everyone thought it was going to be. Then he gets pushed to the main roster, and he's told to do the one thing that makes him so good, talk. He was mute throughout his entire time on the main roster. And then another example, Drew McIntyre. Sure, he comes back. He gets a good run in NXT, being pushed as a big monster of a wrestler. But when he's on the main roster, he's not immediately thrown into a title picture. He's made as the muscle to Dolph Ziggler. Of course, he gets a tag belt, but that's not. But from what we've all seen with Drew in the British circuit and in Impact, he's not meant to be the muscle. He's meant to be the main eventer, and he fits. And physically, he fits everything Vince is looking for. But Vince is Vince. He wants to continue with his Roman experiment. So finally, as much as I hated 2020, that freaking shot, even though Drew was booked to go to WrestleMania and win, it's still just like with Seth Rollins on WrestleMania 35. All it would have taken was Vince to change his mind, and that experiment would have gone right down the toilet. Unlike here with Punk, and Punk's lines, it expresses the same thing. Vince is not going to change, so don't stay in a spot for so long where you think things are going to get any better, no matter what the boss or no matter what you think the agents are telling you.
Absolutely. I can share a personal experience. I worked a job for a company that I will not mention because they will sue me. But I worked there for about a year. And one day at some point, they just stopped scheduling me. Like I'm a guy trying to work 2 to 3 jobs to try to make ends meet. And they literally just stopped scheduling. They scheduled me one day in a course of like 2 weeks. 1 8-hour day. And I'm like, what, did I do something to piss somebody off? Like, what's going on? And then one of the days that they did schedule me, they scheduled me, but asked me to do the jobs of 4 people because they decided to cut the schedule back because they didn't want to pay the labor cost. And I said, you know what? I don't need this. I don't need to do this anymore. I'm in a position where I can tell you guys, this ain't cool. I'm out of here because I'm not putting up with this nonsense anymore. And I walked out. I quit that day because I was sick of it. I wasn't going to be treated like that anymore. And I attribute a lot of that to CM Punk walking out because it was literally around the exact same time. Punk walked out in January of 2014. I left that job in May of 2014 because I was sick of being taken advantage of. But in any case, let's get off that train and let's keep moving. So Punk goes into this thing. He says, can I tell you guys a story? Then he said, okay, wait, it's hot in here. He takes off the hoodie that he's got on. He's got the new shirt. Back in the back, it says, I was there. And they were selling those at the arena. There was no way they weren't. He then, he says again, can I tell you a story? Sits cross-legged in the ring, which gets a huge pop, although I'm sure Malachi Black was backstage going, that's my shtick, asshole. Then he goes in to the story of August 13th, 2005, when he left Ring of Honor. And he mentions that, I left and I was crying coming out for my last match in Ring of Honor because I knew that I was leaving, and I knew, and here's the quote, he said, I had made a place where people could come work, get paid, learn their craft, and love professional wrestling. And he goes into all of this because he mentions how he knew where he was going. It would be very difficult for a guy like him there. And in his mind, August 13th, 2005, he left professional wrestling. And he goes on to say, August 20th, 2021, I'm back. And then that's another just shot right to WWE saying, you're not professional wrestling. I didn't leave pro wrestling when I left you. I just decided to leave shitty sports entertainment, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
All right.
Perfect.
Absolutely. We got another comment from our buddy Travis here. It says, CM Punk's pipe bomb equals shot across WWE's bow that was completely ignored. Yeah, it kind of was.
They willfully ignored that so hard.
Yep. Just like they willfully ignored the yes movement for the longest time.
Yeah. That just goes to show, I mean, it's just a prime example of Vince when it comes to this creative power and wanting to connect with the audience. He wants to connect with them on his terms, on what he created.
Exactly.
So many wrestlers have said in interviews that whenever they do something that gets organically over, that makes them organically connect to the crowd, they are unintentionally punished for it.
Not unintentionally, just intentionally. It's like, we don't want you in this position. You shouldn't be in this position. Stop it. And the way we stop it is by burying you.
I guess what I meant unintentionally, I meant from the wrestler's perspective, they didn't try to get themselves
right.
They just
because it just ended up happening. It was an accident. It was just a complete accident, and they're just like, well, sorry, but you got over without permission. Screw you, which is sad. But in any case, so Punk goes on to talk up the young talent in AEW. He says, I sit back and I say, well, hell, they're there now, so why aren't you? Here I am. So he goes, basically he says, I'm here because I see a lot of young talent who have a lot of, passion and everything that I used to have before, Vince McMahon killed it. And then he says there's some scores to settle in the locker room. I assume he's talking about Jericho because they had that whole thing built up towards WrestleMania with the whole drinking angle and this and that. I also imagine he might be talking about Colt Cabana. I don't know.
I was thinking too.
Yeah. But in any case, he also says, he then brings up Darby Allin, who obviously mentioned him. We then pan to see Darby Allin and Sting in the rafters. He starts to talk up Darby Allin, all the stuff he's done, jumping out of planes, getting thrown over the top rope in a body bag, chucked down the stairs. But he says there's nothing you can do that is more dangerous than wrestling CM Punk, except wrestling CM Punk in Chicago, and then confirms that he and Darby Allin will be facing each other at All Out. And he then says to the crowd, listen, I know 7 years is a long time to wait for somebody, and I appreciate that. So, as a thank you, on your way out of the United Center tonight, pick yourself up an ice cream bar on me. And I was like, that's hilarious. And the fact that they then cut to the announce table and JR, Excalibur, Taz, they've all got CM Punk ice cream bars, I thought was hilarious. And I will bring this up. Because there was a video that just that I just watched a little bit earlier. It showed what happened when Rampage went off the air this past Friday, and it's Punk, Christian Cage, and Kaz all in the ring together. And it was so fun to watch them just jaw-jacking back and forth. Christian seems really happy to see CM Punk there, but Christian makes the mention, is like, I didn't get an ice cream bar, and Punk's like, what? You didn't get one last week? What happened? And he says, don't worry, they'll be selling them at All Out. And Christian's like, yeah, that's how you hook them. And I'm like, and Punk's like, yeah, that's how I get you. I give you the first one free, and then I make you pay for the next one. I gotta keep mine for my dog.
I think another great thing brought up was that after the whole thing with Punk and the ice cream bars, I came across a report that said Punk paid for all those ice cream bars. He footed the bill, not Khan.
Yeah, he paid the entire tab for it. He did.
Yes. And it was beautiful. Yeah. I mean, whoever was selling those ice cream bars at the United Center, I don't know if they got themselves a good tip, but business was good for them.
Oh, hell yeah. Absolutely. All right. So then we move into the post-show media scrum from the end of that episode of Rampage, and there was a lot to talk about. He also, as Punk's sitting there kind of talking, he says, maybe I ought to go through my social media to see if I blocked any of these guys on Twitter. Obviously referring to the media personalities who are going to be asking him questions, because he obviously wants to make sure he doesn't need to block anybody again. But yeah, Tony and Punk confirm his full-time status. Not much else. He said Punk said he thought he was going to cry a lot more. He was hoping people still cared. He legitimately needed to feel the reaction from the crowd that would fuel his words tonight. Didn't script a darn thing, which I think is cool. He then says that he and Tony Khan had been talking for at least a year and a half. They knew they weren't going to bring him back without any fans, because that would just be a waste. They knew it had to be the exact right moment, and just a lot of what they called quote-unquote happy accidents happened in order to get them to the point where they were at, which I thought was, just great.
It was kind of like how when Cody talked about, I remember from a Talk of Jericho interview about Brody Lee, and how the main plan was to get Brody Lee's debut to be in his hometown of Rochester, and to have that big pop there. And then, of course, when 2020 happened, I mean, we all know the biggest negative when it came to wrestling of 2020 was being robbed of Brody Lee. I mean, and that was unfortunate, and that was his year. I will say the work he did with Dark Order, that squash match with Cody Rhodes. It's one of those examples of how AEW is able to take a former WWE talent, give them a platform to where they can work, they can have the creativity to work with whoever they wanted and succeed. Because I'll be honest, the Dark Order, they were slowly getting their wheels back up and running. But once Brody Lee joined them and they were able to change Brody's character from being a Vince McMahon parody to his own little character with throwing the papers, it got the Dark Order
super over.
So over that even they were taking up so much time on BTE than the Bucks, honestly. That's how over the Dark Order was.
Yeah, absolutely. Here we go. Travis pipes in again. He says, look on Tony Khan's face when a reporter brought up CM Punk doing commentary. Yeah, there was a bit of that in the post-show media scrum where some people were asking about that. Punk said, for the most part, it's going to be in-ring stuff. But if in the course of doing that, he needs to be on commentary to sell a feud or whatever, he was more than willing to do that. So it goes to show he's all in on this whole all in. Sorry, little pun there for those of you guys who recognize that. But let's keep going. Punk said that he was extremely nervous to go out there, and that the nerves meant to him that he actually cared again. He actually gave a shit, and that he actually started to love the business again, which I thought was a great line. Punk says he hasn't been doing really anything different than his usual gym regimen. He's been working out in his basement, this, that, and the other. Brings up the fact that he's not going to be doing anything new or fancy in his first match back. Wants the fans to really see that he's still, the same guy. Just got the guy that left is the same guy that got back. He's not trying anything new. He's not reinventing the wheel or anything, which I thought was great. Somebody kind of
smart, honestly. Just slowly get himself back into the physical, the rust of the ring. Get him back into that motion. So then, when he is comfortable, then he can try to experiment a little bit.
Right, exactly right. Let's see. Punk is asked how this moment compares to Money in the Bank. He says it felt way more organic because everything he did in WWE up to that point it felt like a fight. To actually get anything approved, get things put over, this, that, and the other. So he said that this moment tonight didn't need to be overproduced, didn't need a ton of people's input. And he said this one didn't feel like a job. It didn't feel like work. It was just something that was organic, which it absolutely was. Punk asked pretty much, he's asked why now, whose idea were the ice cream bars that he gave away. Basically, he says the ice cream bars were my idea. It was his way of thanking the fans. And he says that the time was right. And this is an actual quote from him. He says, I didn't know how long it was going to take for me to heal, and then this came along. And credit to everybody involved in AEW. It reminded me of places I used to work that I loved, where it was just more about the spirit of the thing, And this, instead of feeling like a house, it felt like a home, which I thought was a great, great analogy. And it shows that, AEW really is, it's an indie fed, but with money backing it up, really. It's got all these people, it's got so many people jazzed up about the pro wrestling industry. I mean, you look at guys like Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks who realized, we could go to WWE, but we wouldn't be happy there. We wouldn't be creatively fulfilled there. You look at guys like Kenny Omega who said the same thing. You look at guys who have jumped ship from WWE to AEW, like Moxley, like Brody Lee, like Christian Cage, like Paul White, like Mark Henry, like Malachi Black, all of these guys who are sick and tired of being strangled to death. It's almost like once you sign that WWE contract, you get a big old chain around your neck and you've got no freedom to do anything. It's a literal dog leash. It's a theoretical dog leash to where you're being pulled in the direction they want you to. And then the moment you want to try to make a step away and maybe find a better path to go down, you're immediately stopped in your tracks. Yeah, exactly right. And then Punk is asked, about Dark and Dark Elevation. Would he appear there? Do commentary, anything like that? He says there's nothing specific in his contract about it, but he won't rule anything out. Is asked about the match with Darby Allin All Out. Brings up that he dropped Britt Baker's name at the very beginning because he wanted to help put her over, because he felt like she deserved it. Says that Tony Khan pitched the match with Darby. Says he did a Twitter Q&A not too long ago and was asked who he'd like to work with, and Darby was on that list. And he loves that Darby has grown, how much Darby's grown in the last few years and how popular he's gotten and all of that sort of thing. So I think that's great. Eventually, Punk, he's asked to elaborate on the whole concept of the quote-unquote happy accidents that brought him to AEW. He says, it was basically a very relaxed process. He didn't feel forced or pressure. There was no ever like, hey, do this. They weren't leaning on him the way Vince would have and this and that. And he says, as far as working in AEW, and this is a quote from him, this is not my words. He says, nobody's standing on their own dick. They just let stuff happen. I'm just like, yeah, that's cool. Don't get in your own way, which I think is a great
examples in AEW where we've seen where only maybe 2 or 3 examples of AEW having to kill something that was getting up that was not working out. Other than that, they allow all the wrestlers to have such freedom with their characters, either on during the dark programs, now with Dark Elevation, even on BTE, even though BTE is sort of kind of like an outside of the whole sphere, but even then, even in BTE for story, best example, Brandon Cutler and Peter Avalon, when they were being a tag team, then they broke up, and then they were feuding with each other. The BTE storyline was doing a good job of showing the tension between those two. So when they did split, the initiative did split. They started to build between the two of them, and they even used certain dusty finishes that at the time during their first year they weren't using, like countouts or disqualifications or referee stoppage. Like they were using those to sell the story. So when Brandon Cutler finally got that first win in AEW, that meant something. It wasn't just like, oh, you got your first victory. No, Brandon Cutler, who was like nearly 50 losses in AEW during that time, gets his first overall victory. And then a couple weeks later on, Peter Avalon rebrands his character, and he gets a victory. And now look at what he's doing. He's got his own stable, the Wingmen. And Brandon Cutler, he's becoming the stooge to the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. And you do see how creatively these guys are working. Like, those are 2 great examples.
Absolutely. Let's see. Travis brings up in the chat, the Bucks going to WWE would equal Generation Me 2.0. You're probably not wrong. That's a very sad thing. Travis also says
they probably mostly focused on how much the Hardys influenced the Bucks to where they tried to make them the Hardy Boys 2.5.
Yeah. Travis says the term "wined and dined" was thrown around it, I think, unless I misheard. No, you're absolutely right. Punk kind of, when he talked about the contract negotiations and the proceedings of getting him signed, he mentioned, I believe he said, some girls are easy to get into bed. I'm not. I like to be wined and dined a little bit, and that's what happened. And I'm just like, hey, whatever works for you, dude. Use whatever analogy you want.
I'll be honest, there are probably better wrestlers who did the same thing during the times of WCW and WWE. I mean, WWF. Sure, some were able to jump ship through certain phone calls, but I'm pretty sure certain wrestlers wanted to get the whole wine and dine experience. Like have that nice steak dinner and then do that handshake deal with either Bischoff or with Ted Turner or with Vince McMahon to go, this is how I'm going to be treated? Good.
Right, yeah. Punk is then asked if AEW had to prove anything to him before he signed, and that and Tony Khan is then asked about his side of the deal and everything that went into that. Punk says, nobody really had to prove anything to him. It was about him being open to the idea. He didn't really it was more about him dipping a toe in the water rather than anybody having to prove anything. He says that Renee Paquette, formerly Renee Young, for those of you who aren't familiar with her real name, he says that she kind of opened his eyes to the idea of working with good people, especially, with Mox and everything else that was going around. He took a wait and see kind of attitude, and when he waited and saw, he liked what he saw. And then Tony's just like, yeah, whatever he just said, is pretty much it. The pandemic kind of lengthened the discussion process in regards to the deal and building that anticipation, which they both thought was a good thing for not just the product, but for their contract negotiations, because it took a lot of the pressure off. They didn't feel like it was a need to get an immediate deal done, which I think was good.
And I do appreciate that. Like Punk really wasn't trying to be in a rush. Sure, he could have been teased during the time when they were at Daly's place, and then it could have started this whole months-long rumor mill of Punk coming to AEW. But no, he decided to be, I'm gonna dip his toe in, maybe check out a few shows and programs, just check out a few programs, see what they're doing, not just, and I understand most likely from the media scrums, he could have just gone mainly off of Tony Khan's word through their talks with each other, but, he wanted to make sure, like, he's watching the product and seeing exactly that what Khan and Paz had been talking to him about, that what he was promised, or mainly what he was going to be offered coming to AEW. And I do like that. He wanted to take his time with this. He wasn't just going to go, oh, wait, you guys are being more successful? You're going to pay me more than WWE? Sign me up. No, it wasn't going to be like WCW to where just come and we'll give you a big-ass contract.
Yeah. Punk was also asked how they kept it a secret, quote-unquote, and was Cult of Personality ever not an option for his entrance music? Punk says no way. It was always going to be Cult of Personality. Talks about how, he respected that AEW managed to keep Brody Lee's secret, about his illness and everything, how, it really kind of caught everybody off guard when that kind of happened. He also claims that, him being there was kind of the worst kept secret in the business, but it was kind of designed that way because they wanted the speculation. They wanted the rumors. They wanted the hype. They wanted the will he, won't he kind of situation. And they didn't advertise him ahead of time because it would have ruined the moment. They wanted that organic reaction of the first time him being there being a quote unquote shock, if you will. So I think that's a very important note as well. Punk is also asked if he's strictly an in-ring talent or does he have more in mind for his role. Punk says he'll do whatever he feels he needs to do. It's not so much that he's got anything. He doesn't need to be given the title of a producer in order to help somebody put a spot together or help to lay out a match or anything like that. And he's not concerned about wins and losses. It's not about his ego or anything like that. It's about, working with the young talent, putting over the company and putting over the young talent who deserve it, which is something that, again, we all know WWE refused to do. Again, he didn't say that. That's my editorializing. Punk, somebody then asked him about what got him to fall back in love with wrestling again. He says he never really hated pro wrestling. He hated sports entertainment, which, again, don't blame him. Tony Khan is asked why they decided not to promote Punk, but also not to outright deny him. And then they also asked Punk if he has issues with anyone in AEW, and if he did, have they been smoothed over? Tony Khan says that they wanted to build again, like I mentioned before, the will he, won't he kind of scenario. And I wanted to sell out the building, which is kind of what they used in order. It was that will they, won't they kind of anticipation that helped to sell out the building. And Punk says he didn't have a single problem with anyone backstage when he walked in today. He said it's a positive night, and he's not going to try to bring it down with, speculation about bad blood or anything like that, which to me indicates maybe things have smoothed over with Colt Cabana if he didn't have any, negative interaction with him, or maybe they just didn't see each other. I don't know. But time will tell. Tony Khan is then asked about any impressive moments going forward. Do they have anything planned? And then Punk is asked if he is excited to be back and excited to be creating moments with the AEW talent. And Punk immediately drops a bunch of people, some of whom he would name drop later on. He said, specifically brings up Brian Pillman Jr., Powerhouse Hobbs, Ricky Starks, Jungle Boy, Darby Allin, the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega. Brings up Jon Moxley, which leads me to Travis's comment here. He says, I love how he said he's never had a match with Jon Moxley. So, which again,
that was a good play on words.
Yeah, it was very, very much a good play on things. So Punk's excited about all the people that he has the opportunity to work with and this and that. And Tony says that he wants to create a lot of indelible and incredible moments, not just with Punk, but with everybody on the AEW roster, which I think is great.
I do want to take a side bit. I do love when the talent he was bringing up there. I do like that one of the names he talked about in the media scrums was Brian Pillman Jr. Because of course with Brian, and he still looks very new. Like he's been wrestling so far like 3-4 years professionally.
Yeah, he's still green.
Yeah, he still looks green. But even then, the way he's been booked, though, he has been put into a good light. Because starting on in, when he came in, of course, he had the name Brian Pillman Jr. Then he's paired with Griff Garrison, the team they have together, the Varsity Blondes. And I like how it's a bit of an old school aesthetic with that team, though. And you do see that you get to see Brian Pillman in some small moments of magic as part of a tag team to the point where he's not being too exposed for being a little green. And I do like the fact that even when he wrestles solo, I think I've seen a few matches he did on MLW, but even then, Brian Pillman Jr. shows just like so much of that young talent, so much promise and so much potential that it's hard not to look and go with, you know what, this is Brian Pillman's son. He's joining the wrestling business. He chose not to go to WWE. He's here in AEW to where he can not only harness that talent, but possibly maybe down the road, depending on where his character goes, he can maybe get a similar storyline to where he adopts his dad's crazy Brian Pillman persona. So
maybe,
it's a big maybe because Brian Pillman's persona has a lot of negatives more than positives with the character, though. But
what I would hope more than anything for Brian Pillman Jr. is if he did decide to go the loose cannon route, I would hope that he has enough support not only from his biological family but from everybody else in AEW, to where he doesn't fall into the same kind of dangerous mindset that his father fell into that eventually took his life. So hopefully...
it's a dangerous route, which is why I'm thinking if he does do if he does, there are only maybe small notices, maybe little small tweaks that he'll adapt into that persona. But if not, I do like this little thing he has. I like this little partnership he has with Griff Garrison, and now with Julia Hart as part of the Varsity Blondes. I do like that. Gives you the old school aesthetic while they're still being like this young team in AEW.
Exactly. Travis brings up some good stuff in the chat. He mentions how Punk brought up that Sting found him backstage and said he's happy to be here.
Yes.
Which is good work with him, which I thought was great. Also, Arn Anderson basically told him, you were born 13 years too late. Pretty much saying if you were born back in the if we were back in the Attitude Era, you would have been a lot more over and maybe given a lot more opportunity. And who knows, maybe he's right.
I agree. I might get the point when that same. I agree and disagree with him because if he was during the time of the Attitude Era, what he would have said back then with that little pipe bomb, it would have just been another moment that was a part of the Attitude Era and not would have made Punk bigger than wrestling.
I would say, by the same token, can you imagine if we got a loose cannon Brian Pillman versus a pissed off CM Punk? Can you imagine the level of what would have happened at that point? But in any case, Tony Khan's then asked about Daniel Garcia, obviously somebody who's up on the rise in AEW. Punk has also asked about how the reaction he got tonight helps him kind of reflect on his legacy. Punk kind of right away says he doesn't put a lot of stock in the word legacy. He wishes there were territories so that he could continue to learn and grow. So, he could go, different places like they did back in the day, like the AWA or, Mid-South or, all of this other kind of stuff in order to, learn his craft and get better and learn different styles. He says he thinks that, his legacy is to kind of help the young guys the way a lot of other veterans helped him, guys like Harley Race, guys like Terry Funk, Eddie Guerrero, Tracy Smothers, Pat Patterson, Sting. He name drops all of these guys. And again, that's where he kind of brings up, Sting mentioned backstage, I look forward to working with you, or wish I can work with you in the ring, this, that, and the other. And who knows, maybe we will get that at some point. But it all just depends on how Sting's health holds up. And then Kana says that Daniel Garcia is under a very, very good agreement with them, and there is a lot of upside to him and a lot of potential, which I think is great. And then the last thing that kind of is brought up is Punk is asked about, the concept of the Forbidden Door. Is he interested in crossover, this, that, and the other? And then Tony's asked about, being basically thanked for, on Twitter by a lot of fans for saving their love of pro wrestling and what his thoughts are on that. Punk says he's an AEW guy. He doesn't want to be fantasy booked against a bunch of, this, that, and the other. He's not looking to be fantasy booked with, Impact guys or this or that. He just got back. He's not really looking to do too much too soon. But he appreciates Tony Khan because for what he's done for the wrestlers and, what he's done for the concept of the wrestling business. And Punk basically says that, Tony has ultimate say on where he goes and what he does. He's really wanting to sink his teeth into AEW for the time being, but that he is, open to doing whatever he is asked to do by Tony Khan because obviously Tony Khan's the one who signs his paychecks in the end. And at the end of the day, he'll do what he's told because he believes in the product and he believes in Tony Khan and his vision. So that is the end of that post-show media scrum. Ryan, your overall thoughts on kind of everything that we've just gone over?
I mean, look, it was clear to me when I watched it afterwards that Punk, it wasn't like he was trying to say all this stuff, trying to be all friendly and on good terms. Hearing the tone in his voice, and especially how jovial it was, during that interview segment. I mean, there's that post interview with the media personalities. Punk's really happy to be here, and I like how when he's closing out, some people could have been like, oh, he's trying to butter up Tony Khan, like he's putting him on a high pedestal. He's like, no, Tony Khan has proven throughout this time with AEW, working with Cody, working with the Bucks, working with Kenny, working with them and so many other talent, he not only just loves pro wrestling, he is wide open to listening and to meeting in the middle. He's not trying to be like, my word's fine. Sure, I may sign your paychecks, but I want to make sure at least you're going to like this direction you go in. And even if you are, let's give it a go, and then we'll try to work out something better with you down the road, because we have had characters be rebranded or at least revamped, like a soft reboot. So Tony is willing to work with the talent.
Yeah, which I think is a good transition into Punk's Dynamite promo from this past Wednesday. But before we get into that, Travis also says, I love how nobody asked in the media post-show about Max Caster. I think even if they did, I think Tony would have just misdirected. It's like, we're having discussions with Max. Obviously, this, that, or the other, but we'll move on from that. It's not anything. It's being dealt with. That's all the more you need to know.
I mean, he's in a hole right now. Max Caster's in a hole, and he's going to have to – it's not like with Sammy Guevara earlier on where Sammy was man enough to at least, try to work his way out of it. Max Caster, it looks like he's stuck there until things blow over or until he's man enough to step up and go, I fucked up.
Yeah. Anyway, but then we move to Dynamite. Obviously, Tony Schiavone is in the ring. He calls out CM Punk to the ring. Again, great reaction even in Milwaukee, which is great. Asks Punk, what brought you back to AEW, or why now? What brought you back to pro wrestling? And of course, it's so loud in there. Punk just goes, I can't hear you, Tony. And again, he's just playing it up to the crowd, which is great. He's got them wrapped around he's got the entire crowd wrapped around his little finger. It's great. Eventually, they do get to the point where, he asks him again, what is it? Why now? What brought you back to pro wrestling? Why AEW? Punk hears a guy in the crowd mention Darby Allin. He says, the guy over there just said
like so many thrown out names, like Darby Allin. I think, Jungle Boy was thrown out there.
Jungle Boy was thrown out. He said Penta El Zero, Ray Phoenix, Jungle Boy, all of those guys. But he says the name at the top of the list is Darby Allin. And he says, I take a look at a guy like Darby Allin and all the other young talent here in AEW, and I wonder, can CM Punk still go? And he brings up everything that Darby's been doing. He brings up everything that, the company's been doing. He brings up that, if CM Punk was still 15 years old, this and that, and he saw Darby Allin on AEW Dynamite, he'd probably be his favorite wrestler. He's not the guy who fits the typical mold. He's not 6'4". He's not jacked to the gills. He's not, probably on a bunch of juice or anything like that. He's just a guy doing his thing. He rides a skateboard. He wears face paint. He has tattoos. He's just a guy, and that's what appeals to him most about Darby Allin. And then he again mentions, I see the young talent. I see guys like Darby Allin, and I ask myself the questions. Can you still go? Can you still be the best? Can you still be the best in the world? And, obviously that triggers a big, big reaction from the crowd, and we all know exactly what it is. Those yes chants. Yes, yes, yes. And he doesn't shy away from it.
Oh, so
all.
Good. So
Not
good.
a bit. He leads. Literally, Tony Schiavone's got the mic right next to his face. He goes, that's somebody else's shtick, and you just need to be a little bit more patient. The entire arena goes nuts, which I thought was great. And he says, this Sunday at All Out, or this coming Sunday, September 5th at All Out, it's less about proving the haters wrong and more about proving myself right that I can still go, Darby. And then he, of course, says hello to his wife, AJ Lee, uses her real name, April, which, again, I love that she called him out for it on Twitter. It's just like, well, I didn't expect to hear my government name today. Thanks, hon. And it was hilarious. And you can tell their relationship, even 7 years later, is still just as rock solid as it's ever been. They support each other. They love each other. And it's just great. Yeah, I would say, hang on. Travis brings it up here in the chat. He goes, I thought it was funny that he was about to leave and went back to give his wife a shout out, like he almost forgot. Yeah, that's kind of how he acted, which was great. And then
because I will say one thing about that moment. There were a couple of fans I came across on Reddit when I perused there, and some of them were like, "Wait, was that a tease that she's gonna show up here?" I'm just like, maybe he just did it because he wanted to. I mean,
yeah, people read too much into it.
Other than that Daniel Bryan tease, he didn't do. He's not trying to tease any other wrestler that's going to be following him. And besides, AJ Lee, she is good where she's at.
Yeah, she's doing just fine with her book tours and everything else that she's got going on. I'm sure she's fine.
She's trying to put together a television pilot with her writing partner Amy Garcia. Like she is good.
Yeah, I would say April is AJ Lee, aka April Mendez. She is just fine. There's nothing she needs to do. Matter of fact, she's probably more than content working from home and taking care of their dog. If Punk doesn't take him backstage to every show he goes to, but in the end, the bottom line is CM Punk is back. We've got the big match set for AEW All Out September 5th, this coming Sunday. But I will say this: there was one other interesting thing that I thought was great. I mentioned before the whole thing with him and Christian Cage and Kaz in the ring after Rampage went off the air. And it's funny because they've got the microphones in their hand and they're swearing like crazy. Like Christian Cage says, "It's so effing great that you're here." Kazarian says, it's great to be out here with you guys. Now let's kick this mother effer into full gear. And Punk has a great line where he goes, "Actually, the next pay-per-view is All Out. That one's not till November. How is it you've been here since day one and I know that and you don't?" Which is a great little exchange. But then the last thing that he did, I thought was so good because we've been seeing it for so long to so many people who love to just bash AEW and bash any pro wrestling that they just find violates their code of ethics. Looking at you, Jim Cornette. The fact is, he says, if you liked what you saw here tonight, cool, share it, tweet it, post it, do whatever you want. And if you didn't like it, shut the fuck up. And then he just drops the microphone, which I thought was great. I'm just like, enough said. Enough said.
Wait, not just to piggyback off of that. When the drawback on Rampage when in the United Center when he showed up about that fan that was crying and this fan was with him with Colin footage and then a photo was being shared among people trying to use him to downplay wrestling. Punk, as the class act that he is, found this fan and he made sure to let everyone know that if he was not wrestling, he'd be just like that fan, passionate about something he cares about. And he felt so fortunate that he cared, that this fan cared about him so much he was willing to well up and cry. And if nobody was really watching Rampage, Punk himself was so damn close to come to tears. So knowing that Punk shows that not only he appreciates the fans that care about them, he is willing to go out to bat for them.
Yep. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is where it kind of wraps up here. We have really gone deep into this whole thing with CM Punk, the man who claims to be the best in the world, a former Ring of Honor world champion, a former ECW world champion, former Intercontinental champion, former WWE Tag Team champion, former 3-time WWE World Heavyweight champion, former 2-time Mr. Money in the Bank, and former 2-time WWE champion. The guy has done just about everything. He has his big match with All Out. I mean, Travis here in the chat says, careful now, Cornette will block you like Brian Zane. Cornette's probably already blocked you right now. I don't care. But the point is that we now have the match set up. And I got to ask the question, Ryan. This Sunday, All Out, does CM Punk versus Darby Allin open the show? You got to wonder. Because, again, in Chicago, we know the crowd is going to be hyped as hell. Do we see Punk Darby open the show, again, to avoid the overwhelming chance of CM Punk throughout the entire arena so that nobody else feels like they're sitting out there giving their all, killing themselves when nobody else cares? Yeah,
that is a very good, solid point. I mean, because there really is no way to break around that. I mean, obviously, in a sense, with the Bucks, they have no problem putting together a show to where if they want to get the crowd riled up, they'll give them the competitor they need to kick off the show. I mean, kind of like at Double or Nothing, Hangman Page and Brian Cage kicked off the show, and that was a crowd that was hot for Hangman Page. And then, of course, at Revolution, the Bucks were kicked off the show because even though the big match was the exploding barbed wire death match, it was obvious that the Bucks needed to get the fans riled up. So I think on a 55 to 45 odds scaling, I will say Darby and Punk opens the show. 55 over 45.
All right. Hey, I mean, I would say I'm probably willing to go 60-40 at this point because I'm not sure. But again, it all just depends. Now, obviously, I don't think there's any prizes for guessing CM Punk goes over. I mean, it's his first match back in a American televised wrestling ring on pay-per-view in 7 years. There's no way he's not going over. But saying that, we both know Darby Allin can look good in defeat no matter who he's up against.
That, and depending on how they book this too, we could have another situation to where Darby pushes Punk to a draw, and that could be a return.
It could go time limit draw.
Yeah. There's no, I think AEW knows that they're backed into a corner because no matter what, this crowd is going to be hot for CM Punk. If CM Punk loses, the crowd's going to hate that, or Punk goes to a draw, the crowd may dislike that. I think, to me, they have to work on getting the crowd to a certain point to where they'll be happy with the finish.
Exactly. But again, both of these guys are over as hell. So either way, and by the time that match is over, there's not going to be a single person who doesn't look at Darby Allin as a main eventer once that freaking match is done. Like, absolutely no way.
No, and people are going to try to detract or try to attack Darby Allin because he gets put over or the fact that Punk wants to put him over. You guys need to shut up because you got Punk back. Don't ruin this, okay? Don't be like, oh my God, Punk comes back and the first thing he does is put Darby Allin over. What the fuck do you expect? If this is WWE, of course WWE would put the returning talent over the young talent. AEW has proven that even if the more veteran players can beat the younger guys, they're going to book them in a way to where not only does it make sense, but you're going to enjoy the story. One thing I did like, I mean, with Malachi Black, I mean, for Cody Rhodes, Cody has been one of the biggest examples of no matter what storyline you're putting against him, when it comes with the big match, he goes over. The only few times he did not go over was against MJF, Brody Lee, and now with Malachi Black. 3 people. Because we've seen look at who Cody Rhodes was able to.
I mean, and Jericho, but Jericho didn't need the rub.
No, Jericho didn't need it, but MJF got over big to close out their feud. And then when Cody Rhodes went for the TNT Championship, what happened? He beats Lance Archer, who everyone was expecting to win. And then every time he puts up week by week all this new young talent that came in, we got the debut of Ricky Starks, the debut of Eddie Kingston, who of course not many people knew, Warhorse, who didn't sign with AEW, but he did impress many fans. And seeing how Cody still got himself over all this talent. And then finally what happened with Brody. I mean, he went over Orange Cassidy, who was on a skyrocket of his own. So the fact that Cody Rhodes, no matter what, even though you get great matches from him, you always had that, I won't say a pit in your stomach or a symbol of dread, but you kind of always knew that he was going to go over. So when we did get that moment when Brody Lee squashed him, that broke everybody. So when Cody did come back and regain the championship, you still liked the result of that match because he put on a great match against Brody Lee and then another great series of 2 fights against Orange Cassidy. And then finally when he did drop it to Darby Allin, you were like, you know what? We got so many good TNT defenses and matches out of Cody Rhodes. We're okay with him. Well, you're not okay. You're ecstatic when he does drop the belt again to Darby Allin. Then you see the run Darby goes on. So
yeah,
it's just one of the downsides. When you have two wrestlers you want to see go over, you're going to have to swallow the hard, bitter pill that one of them is going to go over. Just make sure, but you also want to be happy that you got to see this match. It's almost this dream pairing that you don't get to see even in the indies.
Exactly right. Well, that is going to wrap it up for us here today, folks. Thank you guys so much for joining us. This was a hell of a night. And this has been a hell of a long time coming. It really, really has. But we're so happy to be here, so happy to be back. And I'll tell you where else we're going to be happy to be back. The Chris Jericho Rock and Wrestling Rager at Sea Triple whammy. October 21st through the 25th. I will be there. Ryan will be there. Brenton will be there. We will have an absolute blast. And hell, we may do a show from the boat itself, sitting at the bar, enjoying us a couple of Mai Tais. It doesn't matter. But we are going to have a great, great time. It's going to be kicking off Miami to Grand Bahama, again, October 21st through the 25th. I believe there are still a few cabins available if you are interested. I know a couple of people are having to cancel out of nowhere, this, that, or the other. So go ahead, if you can, go to the Chris Jericho Rock and Wrestling Rager at Sea. It's ChrisJerichoCruise.com. Go ahead and see if you can book yourself a nice little stateroom. It's very, very limited selection. And again, we're less than 2 months away. We're about 53 days left, I think, until that time.
When you sign up for this, you have to be sure that you're going to be able to do this. Commit to this, not just pay off the room, but also be able to buy the plane ticket, because the state, when it comes with the cruise, they want to make sure you mean business, especially since we're 2 months away. I mean, last thing they want is you sign up, and then all of a sudden, by the time your deadline comes, you're $500-$600 behind, and then you got to cancel because then you're kind of just it's not like you're making a fool out of yourself. It's just more of, okay, who can we choose next? Because they want to. It's businesses are coming back up. They want to be able to provide. They want to be able to at least get sales numbers and all that stuff.
Make sure that you can pay off the room. Make sure you can pay for plane tickets, all of that kind of stuff. Hotel fare, whatever. Also, if you do want to go on the Chris Jericho cruise, you must have a double dose of a vaccination for COVID-19 before you go on the cruise. You have to have had your second dose within 2 weeks before the sail date. You also need to pass a COVID antigen test when you get there. So there are a lot of red tape. They're doing everything that they can to make sure that we can have the best vacation possible. Also, if you needed any more motivation for maybe potentially wanting to do this, it's a cruise at sea, 4 days with a lot of great professional wrestlers, including Chris Jericho, including the Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle. Yes, he will be there as the guest of honor. Dr. Britt Baker, DMD, Freshly Squeezed Orange Cassidy, the Elite Hunter Frankie Kazarian, the Fallen Angel Christopher Daniels, Boom Boom Colt Cabana, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, the Rock and Roll Express, Badass Billy Gunn, Dean Malenko, Suge D, a.k.a. Pineapple Pete, Bully Ray, Brad Williams, Medusa. So many great people are going to be there. Go ahead and go online. Again, ChrisJerichoCruise.com. If you still want to sign up, there are very limited spaces available. Do so at this time. And hey, you may be able to come and see us, take a picture, hang out, talk some wrestling. It's going to be a good amount of fun. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for us here tonight, guys. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Wrestling Ramblings and Rages podcast. If you were watching this on YouTube, go ahead and like, share, subscribe, all of that good stuff. It helps us out with the algorithm. Hit that little notify bell so that way you know when our new episodes come out. You can watch us live, comment in the chat. We love to interact with our fans. Also, if you are listening to us on any of the other podcast apps, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anything like that, go ahead, find us, subscribe, leave us a review. It helps us out. It boosts the morale of the show, and it gets us out there to more and more sponsors because we'd like to be able to do that. We'd like to bring these to you guys free, but of course, obviously, the internet and everything else isn't free to do that. So in order to keep it that way, we need to kind of build up our rep a little bit. Granted, we'd still do this if it wasn't paid for because it's just a ton of fun. But again, we want to be able to keep doing this long term. So, hey, whatever you want to do. In any case, thank you guys so much for joining us. We have rambled, we have raged, but it has all been for the love of professional wrestling. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next time. And until then, hey, ref, ring the bell, will you? See you next time, folks.